The next item on the agenda are presentations, and we have a presentation from Translink, Mr. Jeff Busby, on the Siri Langley Skytrain project. Mr. Busby, welcome here.
Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an update on this important project. I want to acknowledge I'm joined by Jennifer McLean, also of Translink, who's my deputy working on the Siri Langley Skytrain project. I have two items to provide for an update for you. One is a general update on the project, as well as an overview of upcoming public engagement, and we hope that you and members of the public in the township and the surrounding communities will help join us to shape the project as it moves forward. Just by way of context, this is an exciting time for our transportation system. We've seen record growth in the demand for our services, and particularly relevant for this project is that growth has been driven by the fastest growth has been south of the Fraser. So there's clearly a need for expanded transportation services, not just the proposed Skytrain project, but a number of other initiatives underway to meet the growing demands in this community. For the Skytrain project, we've set a range of objectives to improve the transportation performance of the system, support the economic development objectives for the region and for the south of Fraser communities in particular. We see the project as an opportunity to make significant improvements in the way that people access jobs, affordable housing, and other services, as well as an opportunity to improve our environment and the health of the region's population. The project that is proposed is an extension of the existing Expo Line Skytrain along Fraser Highway, connecting Surrey Centre, Fleetwood, Cloverdale, and Langley Township and Langley City, with a terminus near 203 Street and Fraser Highway in the city of Langley. The extension itself is just over 16 kilometers with 8 new stations, 3 major bus connections, and additional Skytrain vehicles to allow us to run the longer service once the line is up and running. When the project is delivered, it offers a significant benefits according to the objectives that we've set out. The travel time on the proposed extension would be just 22 minutes from Langley City into King George, where the Skytrain ends today, with trains leaving every 6 to 8 minutes. The combination of that fast travel time and high frequency means that a significant number of people will choose, according to our forecasting models, choose to take transit rather than other modes, specifically fewer people driving on increasingly congested highways. The total cost of the project is estimated at $3.1 billion. This is an estimate that we provided in July of last year as part of our commitment to keep the Mayor's Council, which provides direction to Translink, apprised of the total cost to deliver this important priority. Important context for that cost is the amount of funds that have already been approved and allocated for rapid transit expansion south of the Fraser. Approximately $1.6 billion is available. That was money that was to have been spent on an LRT project in Surrey, which following the municipal election there is no longer proceeding. So the direction we've received is to apply those funds towards a Skytrain extension instead. Again, part of the work we did in the middle part of this year was to understand from a technical perspective how much of this total project can be built for $1.6 billion. So we've confirmed that the Skytrain can extend to Fleetwood with the funding available. Should additional funds become available from the provincial and federal governments, and should the mayors choose to enact new revenue sources, we can complete the line all the way through to Langley Centre, as I said, for $3.1 billion. It's important to note that any additional funds over the $1.6 billion that's already been approved would require commitments from all levels of government. It's likely, if additional revenues are not identified, that we will deliver the project in stages. So you see here the statistics for the first stage of the project, which would extend to approximately 166th Street in Fleetwood, 7 kilometers and 4 new stations. And based on the schedule we have, we project 5.5 years to design, construct, test, and begin operations on the project following project approval. So our timeline for project approval involves multiple rounds of public engagement to help shape the proposed project, ensure that it fits in the communities that it serves, and that it's responsive to its environment. We're doing work to prepare a project business case, which will set out the rationale for the project, its cost, schedule, and its delivery approach. And formally, we require that the project be approved in what we call an investment plan, which is approved by the Mayor's Council for Transportation. We anticipate that that approval could occur as early as the summer of 2020. And if that is in place, we would begin the project procurement process, design and construction, and would hope to have the first stage in service by late 2025. As I mentioned earlier, if additional funds are identified early next year, we could change the initial scope to match the funding that's available with a similar implementation timeline. So an important objective of the project is to provide opportunities for public engagement, and we have an upcoming engagement later this fall that I wanted to make Council apprised of. Our first round of engagement was very successful from our perspective. We heard a diversity of voices from across the region, including residents of the Township of Langley. The themes that we heard in the first engagement were first and foremost very strong support for improved transit in these communities, not just this project, but for bus improvements and a number of other improvements to meet the growing demand for transportation services in this growing part of the region. We also heard, and it was heartening to hear, support for the proposed project, as well as learning more about priorities from the public for what they look for in a successful transit system. The engagement that we're proposing will include information that we gather through stakeholder groups. We've been meeting with chambers of commerce, business associations, environmental stakeholders. We've been at community events as well, all learning about priorities for transportation investment. We encourage you and your residents to participate in the upcoming engagement. One of the features of that engagement will be the scope of our environmental screening review. This is the process through which Translink will understand what the potential impacts the project might have on the environment, both the human and natural environment, as well as where there might be negative impacts, strategies that we can take to ensure that those negative impacts are mitigated. So this is an opportunity for folks to see what the various items that we propose to be studied in detail and identify any gaps for us so that we ensure that this project fits well into the community. So again, we would encourage you to stay, you and your residents to stay involved in the project. We'll have at least one more round of engagement prior to the project beginning its implementation process, where we'll be able to report back on what we heard from the communities as well as the results of that environmental screening review. And to stay involved, we would encourage you to follow the project website and join the mailing list to learn more about upcoming engagement activities. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the update, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Great, thank you. Councilor Richter.
Yeah, you mentioned on one of your first slides that the capacity for the train would be 600. So how many cars will be on each train?
We're actually just in the process of modernizing our train fleet. So that today we have our longest trains are 6 cars long, but rather confusingly, they are smaller capacity cars. So our largest capacity trains have about 500 people on them today. We're in the process of ordering a new train order, which would service this line and as well as other projects. And those will be 5 cars long and have room for about 600 people.
Okay, and I know that we've waited so long to get rapid transit out here. What happens if the train fills up in Langley? Like at the first stop on the first 2 stops, like, do you put more cars on or more frequent trains?
Yes, that's part of our planning, and what we're doing on the technical side is predicting how many people will use the train. So the additional 55 vehicles that we'll be buying allow us to run longer trains, which have greater capacity, and run them more often. And so we're quite confident that there will be room on the train all the way through. That said, we have had experience of ridership that grows faster than expected. The Expo line actually has quite a bit of room for additional capacity growth, both through longer trains and trains that run more often. So we're reasonably confident that we have several decades worth of capacity to accommodate additional demand.
Thank you.
Just to follow up, is it planned then to stage trains? Because if you have starts at Langley, fills up in Langley, and so then it would zip right through, and you'd have other trains staged further down the line. So you're not running a train the whole distance. Empty trains.
Yes, you're right. So these are details that we're still working through, but we anticipate that trains will be coming onto service at intermediate points along the line so that there's capacity all the way into downtown Vancouver. Important to mention that the proposal for this project is that trains that would start here in Langley would continue all the way to Waterfront Station in downtown Vancouver, just not every train would make the trip all the way out to Langley. Yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Woodward?
Yeah, I want to thank you for the presentation. I think I will sign up for the mailing list. That maybe you could change the domain name to Surrey Langley City Skytrain.ca to be more accurate. I think for me, I think that I'm certainly in support of seeing the project go ahead, given that the alternatives probably don't exist, at least in the short term. So, can you go back to the slide that showed the amount of money? I think it was about an extra the shortfall again to get the rest of it.
Yeah, so we're about $1.5 billion short from the completion of the project. So $1.6 billion to Fleetwood, and then another $1.5 out to Langley Centre.
You mentioned all levels of government. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yes. So typically in our region, we've had commitments from the provincial and federal governments for capital construction, and then the regional share, which is typically on the order of 20 to 30%. That needs to come from additional revenue sources that would be enacted by our Mayor's Council. And so that's why Translink, from a staff level, we can't make predictions on whether any or all of those levels of government would agree to those new revenue sources.
For example, you'd be referring to the declining gas tax revenues per capita, something like that, making that up, or also expanding the property tax revenue coming and going to Translink? Would that be some of the options that would have to be explored to make up that other level of government?
That's correct, yes. So right now, our approved plans fully utilize the revenue tools that are available to us, and so additional expansion, both to construct and to operate it for the foreseeable future, would require additional revenue sources.
So it would be unknown at this point to what degree Township of Langley residents might be paying more from property tax and gas taxes to complete the operation of this line. Is that accurate?
Yes, we don't know the answer.
You don't
to
know,
that.
but it'll
Yeah.
be more.
Maybe I could just
Could you clarify that, Mr.
Yeah, it's because Mayor's
Just
Council
curious
struggle
where
with
that's
this. Yeah, all the time. We, as far as legislatively, amount of funding sources that we can use without having new legislation from British Columbia is gas tax, which, as you mentioned, is declining, and property tax. And there is, I know in the legislation there's a vehicle tax that's allowed, but the province hasn't triggered it yet, so it's gone back and forth with different parties over the years. There are other sources that would require provincial legislation that the mayors are always lobbying for and looking for, and maybe mobility pricing. It's a whole big conversation that has to happen, and it could be a share of the carbon tax. It could be provincial sales tax, which was in the referendum. There's a variety of different funding sources that the mayors don't have access to that would require provincial funding that the mayors are actively seeking to get that. So definitely, if this was to go all the way to Langley, there is about a 20% roughly funding source from the local government, and that would have to come from the region, and everything's on the table. But property tax and gas tax are really all we have right now from the province.
That's certainly helpful. And
fares, I should say.
And fares, of course, yeah, and that's helpful. Thank you. But I think I was headed in the direction, of course, that when we say Langley, of course, we mean the city of Langley, and then the township of Langley, with 5 times the population, potentially not being served directly by what it's paying for. So I was just going to raise that as a potential discussion item as the feedback progresses through the public consultation process. And one last question, and I have to ask it, and I might get cut off. Can we get a bus to Gloucester, please? Would that be possible?
I can take that request back to my colleagues
I'm
who
sure
work on
you
bus
can.
planning.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Good question. I've been asking it too. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you very much for coming, Jeff. I appreciate you guys coming. I guess you'll be taking a lot of suggestions back to your colleagues. Anyway, we understand that, you're just a messenger here. You don't make the major decisions. Decisions are made by the Mayor's Council and also by elected officials at the provincial and federal level. We understand that. To answer, Councillor Woodward's comments, it's not quite the Surrey Langley yet. It's Surrey, and we're waiting for it to come to Langley. I think that if all of us kind of pause and reflect, it's kind of a different election night. Tonight, it's a federal election. But a year ago, give or take a few months, in the works, the decision was made by Mayor and Council of Surrey to change their kind of plans for a Translink route that would be different than the one proposed today. And we sat back in Langley's and said, well, we'll wait and see what happens, because it was a benefit. And what was being proposed was a Surrey extension of the Skytrain to Langley. And so we sat back and thought that was great. Now the funding is, they've looked at it, they don't have the money. And that is a disappointment, because a lot of people are saying, well, I thought it was Surrey to Langley. So that is out there in the news. You'll have to take a look at how far you can get versus into the city as well. But, we also have larger areas in Willoughby and by the event center and other things that have a growing population. They're also looking for I guess, larger buses or an access to future rapid transit. My last question is, what kind of a commitment are you looking, I know there's a federal election today, from both the federal and provincial governments for future funding?
I can't speak directly for the commitment from senior government. The task that Jennifer and myself have been given is to define what is the scope of the project and the resources that are required to deliver it. So that's what you see before you today. I know that the mayors have undertaken what they call the Cure Congestion campaign, in which they sought to secure commitments from the federal parties around sustainable funding for transportation. And certainly that would be something that would be helpful in terms of advancing those fundings. I think the observation we would make at staff at Translink is that we do have a growing region, and as we've just discussed, we have limited resources to address that, and certainly we have policy objectives that would try to accommodate more of that growth on transit and less through less sustainable travel like automobiles.
Thank you.
Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yes, thank you for your presentation today. Really informative. I had a question just around some of the sort of other benefits besides the train, which of course is the primary benefit, but around the stations itself, retail space that maybe comes as a result of these, or maybe even in the stations themselves, cycling, pedestrian, some of the other sort of side benefits to a community other than simply having the train. I wonder if you could just speak to that a bit.
Yes, no, I appreciate the question. So one of the items that we'll be looking for feedback in this upcoming round of engagement is priorities for amenities at stations. So how do residents and potential customers value amenities like places to park bicycles, places to pick up a cup of coffee, those types of services. That will be part of the information that we'll be soliciting in this engagement, and that will help us on the project team prioritize what amenities are at the station. So there's a good relationship between your question and the consultation questions that we intend to ask.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Long.
Thanks, Your Worship, and thanks for coming. I guess you should have worn your flak jacket because you're the messenger and we've got lots of things to shoot at you, I'm afraid to say. But it's just a shame, really, that, a year ago, as was mentioned, the whole plan got turned upside down. So I'm personally disappointed because I think the other plan would have been much better and got us a lot further. But here we are with this, and I guess it's not terribly timely that you're here today. It might have been better if you came next week, because maybe we'll have a bit more certainty as to where the other orders of government may or may not be involved in this. But what disturbs me here a little bit is that I don't see a lot of interconnection between this line and the rest of the township. It's been mentioned a few times where the population densities are. So my request would be that there is a real pressure put on and incentive to get those connecting lines up 200th Street or wherever they have to be to connect Willoughby and the other areas, and Brookswood for sure, to this line. So
Yeah,
will you
no,
take that
I
back?
appreciate the comment, and the map itself is perhaps misleading. We are already actively increasing bus service. We obviously have more work to do, but part of this project would include a bus integration plan that would feed people by transit to the proposed stations. Not particularly well illustrated on the map in front of you.
I had another map that showed overlay with the regional growth strategy. I don't know if that can be put up, but I mean, when I looked at it, it did show Gloucester as one of those nodes that is a big part of the regional growth strategy for employment, and there are no lines at all connecting to there, so hopefully we'll get some action on that too.
Thank you. I see no further questions, so thank you very much
Appreciate your time.
for the
Thank you.
presentation. Look forward to the public engagement on this. Thank you. All right, so now we go on to delegations, and we have Amanda Lebocane from the Langley Poverty Reduction Task Force here to present. Is it?
Not Amanda.
Oh, you're not? Oh,
That's okay.
We'll just change that to Barb Stack. Good job, Amanda. You delegated it.
She
Excellent.
did.
You can run for mayor.
Uh-oh. What does that mean?
Means you're in trouble, Barb.
Security alert.
Do I just click OK?
Just cancel. Okay.
Is that because there's a video embedded, maybe? Will it play? Okay, great.
Hey, welcome here. And yeah, if you just want to, for the record, provide your name and who you represent.
Great.
And you'll have 5 minutes to present. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council, for letting us present. My name is Barb Stack, and I work for the Langley Division of Family Practice. I'm here with Shannon Woykin from Meals on Wheels, Denise Darrell from Sources, Amanda Labocane from Fraser Health, Amanda Smith from LEPS. And also, we have a large group that is part of the Poverty Reduction Task Force in Langley. So we are representing the Poverty Reduction Task Force Committee, and we'd like to share with you our vision, what we see in our community in Langley. So hopefully this will play. Nope. Does anybody know how to? Does anybody know how to make it play? It should. Okay, well. Can you right click? Sorry. No, it was embedded in the PowerPoint, but I guess we'll just skip it. So, sorry about that. We can actually send you the actual presentation. So we're really here to speak to you about the need for a community hub in Langley, a gathering place for all, and a place where we can build local food resilience. So the Poverty Task Group was made up of community organizations, as poverty and access to food was a common theme that kept reoccurring at the Healthy Community Partnership table. In 2015, we held a poverty forum where over 53 community members representing different organizations came together. It was designed to create a shared vision of what a healthy Langley would look like if poverty was dramatically reduced, identify and prioritize barriers, and develop high-level action plans to overcome these. So as a result of this collaboration, there were 7 main barriers that were identified with strategies to overcome them. This framed the work for the Poverty Reduction Committee. The focus has been on a central resource hub or a gathering place and food instability. We would be happy to provide you with the full report from that event from 2015. So we identified that people living below the poverty line, accessibility to food was a concern. In the Fraser Health region, 12.3% of households with children was reported as food insecure. The concept of a community hub, as pulled from successful examples in other regions, really meets the needs for Langley. In closing, I'd like to say that we have some great examples of Langley working together in collaboration on a project and a need. The local Langley Youth Resource Center, or the Youth Hub, is a great example of organizations coming together to work in collaboration. At this time, I'm going to let Shannon talk. Do you want me to do your slides?
Sure.
Okay.
So with the Langley Community Hub, food is the tool. The community hub, centering around food, will be a safe space for a community to come together to eat, learn, play, and grow. Programs will be using food as the tool to build community involvement and to build better health. The Langley Community Hub is a shared vision. Partners are working together to provide each piece of the vision in a welcoming, relaxed setting that's open to everyone. Seniors, youth, and families can be part of the programs and opportunities that meet their individual needs. Together we can do more. All of these pieces will strengthen our community, whether it's sharing a community meal, taking a class, connecting to health and community resources, learning a new skill, making friends, and learning food preparation, food knowledge, and food skills. And we will impact the food recovery in Langley. And in your package, there was a new stats on that. And so together, we will do more to nourish our community.
Thank you. The Community Food Hub is a collaboration of multiple partners, organizations, and key stakeholders. Each of the organizations that are listed, and many of them are represented today, are passionate about improving food security and the health of our community. Through strong partnerships, we will be able to efficiently, and I love the word efficiently, provide increased programming, initiatives, and connection to services in an effective manner. And in turn, partner organizations will have a strong, broader support system operating as one cohesive unit, and this will positively impact the health and well-being of the populations in our region. As I mentioned, we do have a lot of representation today, so there will be lots of roles that each of us can take on. But just to give you an example, there would be fundraising support. There would be capital funds that would come forward from some of the organizations. Of course, resources in kind. And so we're very, very, as I said, excited about this. But really, in order to make this vision a reality, we do require support. Today's presentation is really just for awareness purposes, but we do ask that you take the time to educate yourselves about the wide-reaching community benefits offered through the existing neighborhood house and community food centers in other regions. This is not a new concept. There are many, many positive examples of this model in action in other regions. However, to advance this project, we do need decision makers at the table representing on the poverty reduction, participating on the poverty reduction task force. We do require space to develop this hub, ideally 7,500 to 10,000 square feet, in a centrally located, inclusive community space. We will need additional funding, support, and buy-in from our local government. So please, keep this proposal in your mind and consider us for future opportunities as they may arise. Through meaningful connections, educational opportunities, and positive community impact, this project will ultimately improve the health and well-being of individuals and families throughout the Langleys. It will reduce the burden of the healthcare system, it will improve food security, and contribute to strengthening our local economy. Thank you for your attention and your time.
Well, thank you. And I do have some questions from Council. Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you very much. So this neighborhood house concept, I'm intrigued by that. I was wondering if it had to be like literally a house, but I think what you're looking for is something that's considerably larger than a house at 10,000 square feet. So how many hours would it run in a week? Would it be open like 24/7, or is it going to be Monday to Friday? How many people do you anticipate will use it? And I noticed that you did mention that Aldergrove was an area of need. Would you see this located in Aldergrove, a hub like this? And my last question is, you referenced funding support. What kind of funding support are we speaking about?
You want me to take it? I don't care. Oh,
We'll
can
do it
both chime
together.
in. Yeah.
So we, I'll just answer the Aldergrove first. Ideally, we would look at a hub and spoke model. So ideally, we would like to be more centrally in Langley versus Aldergrove. But definitely, as we develop into what it can be, we would like to have a secondary site or part of it in Aldergrove. If we could have Translink, then we could have bus service that would get us to wherever it's going to be. With regards to a house, yeah, definitely we need a larger space to house all of the community partners. So based off of what the youth hub is, partners would rotate through, provide service whenever they're able to. It most likely would be 7 days a week. I don't see it 24 hours a day right now, but definitely 7 days a week. Do you want to add anything?
Sure, and based on the models that we have seen, again, we encourage you, and we can supply a list of some of the existing neighborhood homes that are out there, not homes, but centers. One of the things, as Barb said, is it might not be 24 hours a day, but certainly 7 days a week. Because things don't close down in terms of community need on the weekends. In terms of supports, again, what we're looking at is, for example, I can speak for Sources, is that we're willing to put some capital towards this. We just have submitted an application to the Victoria Foundation. We have asked for $150,000. What that would help us with is to build up a commercial space in terms of the kitchen, which is why we need that kind of space. But I see all kinds of things happening out of this, and I certainly around the table we have talked about that in terms of employment opportunities and training out of this food hub. We're very, very excited. I don't know if that answers all of your questions.
Just about how much money were you looking for from us?
Well, we're at the concept stage right now,
Yeah.
So it's one of those where you find the location and then you build. And so I know that's not a hard answer, but that's all we can look at right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would it be ongoing funding that you're looking for, or just
I think for
a grant?
Again, for capital,
Yeah.
the initial, and then we've got enough partnerships that it would be program funding for us.
Okay.
So
Great, thank you.
Councillor Kunst?
Yeah, thank you for coming, and I do want to thank all of you. I know that you work with some of our most vulnerable, and I appreciate all that you do in our community. I really like this Langley. So it's like a food hub. It's around food. So would it be similar to? I know that the Gateway of Hope offers like a food program where they teach some of their residents how to prepare food, because a lot of times they can go shopping, but maybe they're not necessarily don't have the skills to prepare food to make it last for a couple of days or a week. Would it be similar to that program? And I think they offer like food safe and that sort of thing. Is it around that sort of thing, or?
I think so. I mean, for me, what it would be, again, is that we're going to skill up people. So, again, how do you prepare food? How do you, for example, recover food? There's lots of food waste out there. How do we use repurposed food? It doesn't always have to go to the landfill. And now I know with Sources, for example, we're partnering with Save On Foods and Superstore, I always forget, Loblaws, for example, and we're doing a lot of recovered food. So why couldn't we bring that in? I do want to be clear, though, this isn't about a food bank. That's about food distribution. This is about working with recovered food, reprocessing the food, helping with starting up small businesses, social enterprises. Why can't we take things like spoiled fruit and turn them into jams and chutneys and help people?
And it's also about education. So teaching people those skills, being able to learn how to can again, or working in the commercial kitchen, or all of those pieces too. That's part of it.
Just one more question. Are there other communities that have this specific type of hub? And where would they be?
Well, I think neighborhood houses are in Vancouver and some in South Surrey. The Canada or Canadian food community food centers is going across Canada now. I think there's about 12 of them, and I don't think there is one exactly like this here in the Lower Mainland. I think that the North Shore Neighborhood House is the closest thing we can see right now that sort of aligns with what we had envisioned.
So geographically, your ideal, where would you see this happening in the township?
In the township, as close to being central into the Langley and the buses and transportation. Maybe even walking distance too, like something that's easy accessible through walking. And we really our vision is to satellite and hopefully have something in Aldergrove.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Councillor Ferguson?
Well, yeah, thank you very much for coming. I see you had an ambitious project here, obviously. I see you've got a number of members and teams. Everybody's on board, obviously, looking for a facility. I guess I was at the homeless walk or something last Friday with a bunch of people. I know that you probably are in touch with those. On some Wednesday mornings, I go down to, I guess, the Vineyard Church there. Now, your main thing is food and food services, training, educate, all positive things. We're finding in the Langleys is that we're getting more and more of homeless challenges, but you'll be reaching out beyond that. Have you got any idea of your demographics of the numbers of folks you might be attracting to your organization or neighborhood house?
We have no idea, but it's based on, it's open to anybody. So it's really that any person that wants to come in and have a place to have a cup of coffee, to learn a skill, to volunteer or support. It's not based on a certain demographic group for sure. It's open to anybody who wants to come.
So I'll give you an example, Barb and Shannon. The fact is, sometimes I go to the Vineyard and around Christmas time, sometimes around Thanksgiving, and to Southgate Church and a few others. As you know, you're all aware of who they are, and they always have a full house, full settings and things like that. I mean, on any given day, I imagine those are the same type of people or clients you'd probably run into.
Yes, but not necessarily only them. This is open to anybody. It's seniors, a place for seniors to go and just have a cup of coffee and talk to somebody. It's a place for a mom to come with her new baby or her children to come and learn a skill. It's not specifically for somebody who is homeless or at risk of homeless. This is for anybody who wants to come and participate.
And I think
that wouldn't be our target.
That's so important because I think it's good to make it broader because we're getting more and more organizations reaching out to a certain demographic. It's important to spread it out further. I wish you well, and if there's anything hopefully we can do, we'll be listening.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I really appreciate all the work that you've done, and I know that you come from a number of stakeholder groups, but you're actively working together, and this is a composite part of a larger project to help to reduce poverty. I think the food security for me is very interesting in the township of Langley because it does align with a lot of our goals that we have, our sustainability goals as well as agricultural viability. And recently, I've been reading how it's very important in terms of a zero waste perspective that we're looking at ways of protecting and preserving food products that otherwise get thrown out. And, those are really viable things. I think in some ways, being in the communities that we have and being highly urbanized and sort of, isolated in some senses from agrarian type activities, we really have lost touch with the ways that people used to be able to preserve things, and there's a number of reasons that's true. But you have answered a number of questions. My primary question was where would it be located, and you've discussed that. Also, what, and I think you've also referenced the fact where we could find another such area that's been developed that way, like a neighborhood house that would have those kind of activities. Have you investigated in any way potential for other levels of government to participate in your funding? Have you thought that far ahead about partnering and matching funds perhaps from government? It's just a thought. And finally, food gleaning. I just refer to, I refer to that because of LEPS, because I know you do a really wonderful job. And I have to say, my husband never goes out in the car without looking to see if there's a tree that's got some apples on it, or an abandoned walnut tree, or whatever it might be. Because, as I said, there's a lot of sources and resources for food. However, people aren't connected to that. And I think it's a really valuable network that you're suggesting to help to educate people about what's available, and also then to train them on how to utilize those things. Because canning, and it's not everybody who can do those things, but there are kind of smaller scale things that people can do to make themselves more food secure, because I think that that is a thing that, especially when other things are so expensive in our community, that we have to continue to look at how we can enhance people's ability, because, you know, food security, I think, should be a human right, and especially in Canada and our community, I think we really need to go for that. So just appreciate what you're doing and hope we can be helpful.
Councillor Long?
Better keep out of that cherry tree, your husband. Well, I appreciate your presentation. I'm glad it's kind of morphing into more of the food discussion, because that's one of my favorite subjects. There is a National Food Waste conference happening at the end of this month in Vancouver that will be dealing with the whole food recovery aspect, and it is such a shame how much food we waste and how much it could be repurposed. There are also a number of members of the National Food Waste, the National Zero Waste Council, of which Langley Township is a member, including Second Harvest and Provision Coalition. There's a number of national groups that are very active in this particular field, so there'd be partnerships there. Perhaps that could be forged, but certainly some information and networking and help can be garnered from these people. So I would encourage you to maybe to attend that. I know that some of us on council will be at it. It's in Vancouver at the end of the month, but do connect with the website, and there are some links to those particular organizations and others that are doing very much what you're talking about on different scales, but I'm sure we could all work together to get it to happen. And then I guess your appeal, although we don't have a facility at the moment we can hand to you, but maybe we need to get that word out in the Langleys that we're looking for such a thing, and perhaps someone will come forward and provide some space and help you along. And we'll help wherever we can too. Thank you.
Okay, well, I see no further questions. Thank you very much for your presentation and bringing that to our attention. Right. You don't have to leave. You can stay and watch.
Sorry.
All right, next item is reports to council. F1 is community feedback on fire services. It's a motion for receipt. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Davis, second by Councillor Arneson. Any questions or discussion on this? Councillor Davis?
Yeah, I just wanted to brief. In the information that came out of it, there was quite a number here. The one I liked was check and replace smoke alarms for the aging population. And I believe it is a law. You have to have a fire alarm in a residence in the Township of Langley. It's a law, and fire alarms, smoke alarms, can save lives, and that's very important. And another one I noticed down here, it says monitor train traffic in the township to minimize and avoid truck delays at level crossings. It's not just truck delays. I think they meant fire truck delays. And because I know every time I see a fire truck coming, there's a train there, I try to take a picture of it, and I got, the last 5 or 6 years, I've got 3 or 4 pictures of the fire truck sitting waiting, and that seconds can mean a lot. So it's just, those are things that I know we're working towards. But a simple fire smoke alarm can save lives. So get them in.
Well said. Thank you. Councillor Long.
Well, I'll just pick up on that. Thanks, Your Worship, because I know that the Rotary clubs were interested in getting involved in a program as such. I'm not a Rotary member, but this is what I heard, that they would maybe be able to help sponsor, purchase some, and if they can get some assistance from the fire department. So that's certainly an initiative that could have come out of this. But I was kind of concerned a little bit. Between April and July, we've done this survey. How did we get 27% of them to be our firefighters responding? Because it kind of skews the thing a little bit, eh? Did we have the, was the poll taken outside the fire station? I'm not trying to be facetious, but anyway, I guess it's good input and it's interesting, but I mean, it's too bad that more of the public didn't participate. And what is the next steps, Your Worship? Where are we going to take this information? What are we going to do with
Mr. Backen?
Thank you, Your Worship. The fire chief will use this as input in terms of ongoing working on the fire department planning processes. So it's here's an update for council and really just to let you know where we're at.
Okay. Thank
Councillor
you.
Ferguson?
The question just keeps coming up, and I'm not sure if staff's able to answer. I mean, there's always been the question of integrated system where the fire and the ambulance would be working together, and also medical calls of efficiencies within who's doing what. Is there been any movement whatsoever on those initiatives, if I may?
Mr. Backen?
Worship, it's a very astute question because there is no real answer to it. The process has been evolving. There is good cooperation between both agencies, but there is still this overlapping jurisdiction, and there is still more work to do.
I mean, obviously, if I may, nobody wants to put any loved one or family member or friend or neighbor in a situation of a safety concern. But the reality is when you see two people with fender benders, just a bump or a scratch, and you have the police and fire, not necessarily the ambulance, because the ambulance, I think they screen their calls a bit better. They're chasing after, and they all show up, and they're gone pretty quickly but it did result in a service being implemented that probably wasn't necessary. But I don't have to comment to that either.
Thank you. Okay, see no further discussion. Call the question on F1. It carries unanimously. Move on to F2 is proposed 2020 council calendar. Could I have a motion, please? So moved. Councillor Davis, seconder. Councillor Gunst. Councillor Richter on the calendar.
Yeah, I was disappointed in this calendar. We'd had a fairly lengthy discussion at council priorities and working through the procedure bylaw about our need to stop with these marathon meetings and move to a third meeting a month where we could put other items into that third meeting in order to reduce the 12 noon to midnight meeting scenario that we seem to spend or have seemed to spend a lot of time on. So I can't accept this calendar in its current format.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with that point. I specifically want to refer to September, and just for everybody's information, if you look at that, there's only one meeting on the 14th. So I'm wondering why it is, other than UBCM coming up on the 21st, but on the 28th we could otherwise have a meeting. Is there some structural reason that we have not had a second meeting in September?
Backen.
You're correct. It's a bit of a process reason. When we schedule the meetings, we like to do them every other week. That allows us time to publish for the public hearing, if there is to be one. So in that situation, since there's not one on the 21st, going by memory, that would push us to October if we were going to have the next meeting. And of course, then that rolls into other conflicts. So we found it simply easier for council to call meetings as are needed, if they're so willing, and to just when we have a gap, leave the gap there so council gets a bit of a break.
If I could just sort of underline the fact that it seems to me when we come back from quite a long summer break and there's many things to attend to, it's rather unfortunate that we can't have a second meeting in September, because that's right prior to our budget considerations and discussions. So that's just my thought.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question on F2. It carries with Councillor Richter opposed. And move on to now, I think we've changed the agenda, so we're moving to I2. Is that correct, Ms. Bauer? I think that was how we did it. Okay, so I2. So Councillor Woodward,
yeah,
put you on.
I won't read this. I think the whereases are intended for council to read while during the debate, but I will highlight and read out the therefore, just to, and then clarify some things. Therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to consider and report back as soon as practical with a potential revision of the CAC policy dated April 15th. That's the most revised version, most recent version. Potentially implement a phased exemption approach, similar in concept to development cost charges, with graduated increases over time, similar to the current CAC framework, with a definitive sunset to the potential for exemption, and authority delegated to staff within clearly defined parameters and criteria, or B, to remove 5.4F as a potential condition by which development can apply to council for an exemption from the CAC contributions program. So move.
Because moved and second, moved by, but so just before I take the second,
I just want to
clarify, is it A or B?
No,
Is
so
it?
I'll clarify that,
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor,
so
when I speak to the motion.
Sure, yeah, it'd be great if you could move one of them. Then.
I moved both for a reason, and then I'll clarify
okay.
why. Okay.
So I'll need a seconder then. So I'll take, well, if that's the way you want to do it, second by Councillor Richter? Yeah.
Nope. So I wrote it out as or because I read it out as or, but I'd like to move A and B together in a single motion because what I'm suggesting here is direct staff to consider and report back as soon as practical on A and B as two potential options for us to consider. So with A, we would say the exemptions are going to carry forward potentially similar to DCCs with some definitive sunset, or B, which is just to remove the exemption item from this policy. Obviously, you can't do both. So the rationale around this is I got a call, obviously, from the exemption that was denied by Council 5-4 at the last meeting. And he brought to my attention that, what are we going to do about the other ones? And I said, well, what other ones? And so I asked staff to let me know how many applications are out there that qualify for exemptions, to at least request the exemption under the current policy. And it's 22 applications, including the one last meeting, for a total exemption revenue of $11.6 million. And so what I wanted to do is, rather than have us debate each one individually, that maybe we can consider, and if it's rejected, that's fine. That'd be council's decision. But to consider looking at these as a group rather than adjudicating them individually based upon some criteria that I'm certainly not familiar with. If some are accepted and some are rejected, I think we're heading down the wrong path. I think I would rather see it adjudicated similar to development cost charges, that if you have some period of time to comply, and if you don't get completed, well, then this sunset doesn't last forever. So currently, we have some that are, been sitting on third reading for 4 years. We have a couple of other ones. I think the one from last week is a bit older than that. And to me, that's not particularly reasonable, that to sit on an approval for a number of year after year after year, not expecting to be subject to additional fees brought forward from the municipality for various reasons is not reasonable. And so I'd like to at least have the debate with council on a comprehensive policy to treat all 22 and then delegate authority to staff, or simply remove it as an exemption and they don't come forward at all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So thank you for that. It certainly has some merit. I just have a few questions. First of all, for staff. So with the 22 that are there, now does that include the one that was turned down last meeting? So that includes that one. So, okay, thanks. So thanks. So we would, I think if this goes through, so first of all, if this goes through, then there's 2 on the agenda tonight, plus the one that was, we would refer then those 2 to this process. Is that, would that make, is that, I just want to know the next step. Mr. Mackin, is that?
That would make some sense, Your Worship,
okay.
though council does have the discretion, as it's on the agenda, to process them independently, but logically it would make sense to do that.
Okay. And then, the motion gives a couple of options, so, we're actually asking staff then to come back with getting rid of it. That might be the easiest thing for them to do, and then a process. So I think the one is removing it is just a given. I mean, we always have that option when it comes back, so I don't think it needs too much staff time. The other one is coming up with a criteria. Would the criteria include, maybe the mover can help me with this, would that criteria include perhaps a time from when they applied? So if one has been sitting in for 3 years, that might be a higher discount, let's say, than one that just came in the day before the deadline, which would be a lower discount. Or are we looking at treating them all equally, or would staff come back with those options? And maybe just to get some clarification, make sure that this motion is clear. So, Mr. Backen.
We'd have to consider that, Your Worship, but one of the underlying principles is equity. In many cases, there's reasons why applications have been resting for some time and others why they're going forward quite aggressively. So I don't think I can answer your question specifically. We'd have to look at the parameters and try to come up with something that would deal with both those scenarios.
Okay, thanks. And how soon would that take to come back? Because these are sitting here, they need some answers. I guess they want to move forward. what kind of timeline are we looking at?
Steffi?
Your Worship, the intent will be to do this as quickly as possible, given the fact that there are applications pending a decision of council. So we would aim to do that, as I said, as soon as possible, and no later than before the end of the year, for sure.
Thank you. And for the one that was turned down, would that require reconsideration? Can we just refer that one back if we were going to, because it has a decision made, and if we were going to have any policy, if this was to pass, I'm saying.
To be consistent, then I believe the process would be reconsideration with a referral, not an adjudication
right.
until this process was complete.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Councillor Long?
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep up to speed. They are quite different recommendations here, so we're going to have to get some advice from staff. And as was mentioned, there's different reasons why some of these things sit. They're not just sitting. There's circumstances, I guess, that pop up that cause delay. I would hope that most of the time is to improve the project and to improve things, so there shouldn't be a penalty for that. And I'm glad to hear staff, if this goes through, would expedite it, because we're talking about huge money sitting on the table too for people that have invested in their projects and want to see them moving. So I guess I just want to get my head around, because this word "or" that came in. So I guess staff are going to just give us both scenarios. Or no, because the second scenario is just forget about it and everybody pays. So I'm not sure why that's in there, but it doesn't matter. I would be very keen to see what A comes back with, and I guess I'm looking for some confidence from staff that they could come up with something in short order to deal with this. And of course, not coming back to council would be the best, because there would be an adjudication process of some kind that would automatically kick in, hopefully contemplating all of the different scenarios that can come up, so that everyone's happy, win-win. And it may be much better to get a portion of the CACs, a fair portion, an equitable portion, than piecemealing some we get, some we don't. I mean, tonight you're looking at 1-point-some-odd million on the agenda tonight, and there was a couple $100,000 last time. So I think what I'm saying is I kind of support staff coming back if there's some confidence they can do it in timely manner, which is part of the motion.
Thank you.
Worship, that's correct. We're interpreting the motion to be really to have a report that considers both as options as opposed to each motion being on the table. So we're looking at this as a referral, if you will, to consider those options and whatever else may be appropriate. And as you've instructed, that the secondary option of simply not having that process is fairly self-evident and fairly brief. It's going to be trying to put in place a more detailed, program that would actually deal with the variables in a timely manner, but also would make sure there was equity in the process itself, so that there was some recognition of the long-standing applications versus the shorter applications and the reasons why, but as well doing it in such a way as to make sure that it's automated as much as we can make it.
Thank you. Councillor Richter? Oh, sorry, Councillor Long.
What's the status of those?
What we'll do if this passes, then we can do a deferral.
Aside.
We can do a deferral on those decisions. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, I just want to say I prefer option B. Basically, growth does not pay for itself, and growth is creating the need for more firefighters, more police officers, more rec centers, more parks, more schools, more everything else. So I think the $11 million that's sitting on the table, we should be putting that into more fire and more police. So my preference, I'll support the motion going to staff. My preference is B, though.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
I think that I think we're having an interesting discussion. I think some of the things that have been mentioned are part of the application process. So if we want to develop an area, say I call it Yorkton West, we need to put in the school and park sites along with services, roads, sewer, water, things that are not in the area, and that holds up the application. And the people doing the application are doing those very things that have been talked about, putting the school sites and park sites in place. They're doing that. Adding more things when they already have been putting their time and energy in is a challenge, because they've already been sitting on projects waiting to move ahead, but they haven't been able to, for one reason or another, get it to make this magic date. And many of them, because of that time, they were sitting there waiting to move forward. That doesn't necessarily mean to say that I wouldn't necessarily see some fairness, and depending on looking at every single application, even if there are 22 on an individual basis, would be all right with me. But my question to staff is, how soon might you be able to get back to us with a report? Because time is money in the development business. We want roads built. We want sidewalks going to schools. We want safe roads. We want the parks for the actual students and the residents. I mean, the longer we hold some of these up, indeed we won't get the necessary services and amenities that the residents request. So, my question is, how long before you could get back to something like this?
I think Mr. Steffi had already said he's going to, or Mr. Steffi, you can answer.
Yes, Your Worship, as I mentioned earlier, we'll try and do it as quickly as possible. I'm hoping we could do it for the second meeting in November, but as I said earlier, certainly before the end of the year.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward?
Yeah, I just want to respond to some of these points. I think these are good points. I think the motion is trying to be helpful in the core sync is not trying to force a decision today, but outline very clearly to send it back to staff with some idea that it's going to be based very similar to DCCs. When they go up, that doesn't come to council on an exemption basis. You either meet a certain timeline or you pay higher DCCs. And I think that's the direction I'd like to see it to go. But there are other options. But the core goal is fairness around 4554, 4554. I don't know what criteria we're going to be using other than evaluating the individual developer or development or the amount of money, and I don't find that to be a fair criteria. And maybe this needs to be flushed out a little bit more to provide fairness for the development community around one person getting them and one person not getting it. And of course, if someone feels that it's too slow or slowed down, they can proceed tomorrow by paying the CAC and going to final adoption anytime they wish if this process is carrying on. If it's a smaller amount of money, they can pay the CAC and develop tomorrow. That's certainly an option for every single one of them. And I look forward to seeing, maybe something in writing and other ideas. A very simple idea could be to split the CAC in half, at 50% for everyone, delegated to staff, and that's the end of it. There's lots of different options that we could consider. Once we see a report from staff, everybody gets all the information that they want to get around the issue, get some comfort around some of these issues, we delegate it to staff, and the issue's resolved. That's my goal. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I see no further discussion. I'm going to call a question on I2. Carries unanimously. All right, we move on to F3, and so it's community amenity contribution exemption. Could I have a motion, either a motion to deferral until such time as we get the report back on that? Is that?
I would simply refer it to staff to deal with in conjunction with the previous report.
Thank you. So that's the motion then, Councillor Long? We can do them both at once if that's okay with Council. Okay, so moving F3 and F4. Well, that's a separate deal because it would require reconsideration. So we'll deal with F3 and F4 first. So it's been moved by Councillor Long, second by Councillor Woodward. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call a question on F3. And that carries unanimously. Now, Ms. Bauer. On
reconsideration of the previous one, if you wish, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so the reconsideration can be moved by council. We have to give notice in the bylaw. We're required to give notice, aren't we? So I think.
Yes, we are required to give notice.
Yeah. So notice hasn't been given. So if a member of council wants to give notice for the next meeting, it still is going to flow with this, anyways. It's not going to delay it, I would think. So, Mr. Backen.
Worship, you could provide notice this afternoon and deal with it this evening under other business.
Is that
reconsideration?
And how many days has passed since that? When was this? Was that the last meeting? So I can bring it back too, at any time. I don't have to give notice, do I? Under the bylaw.
No, I don't believe you do need to give notice under the community charter.
As long as the time frame. Okay, I'm going to, and I want to make sure council's okay with this. Otherwise, we'll go to the other process. If council's okay with me bringing it back without, I don't have to give notice, but I want to be fair. So, okay, I'm going to bring back the motion from the October 7th meeting. I don't have the number of the motion, but that was, if you can get that for me, then it's in the minutes for reconsideration. So it's back on the table. So that means we now need a motion to refer it to staff, as similarly as we did for F3 and F4. It's been moved by Councillor Woodward, second by Councillor Arneson. And any discussion on that? If not, I'll call a question. And what should I label this one, Madam Clerk?
We'll add it as F5.
5, thank you. Okay, so I've called the question. Yeah, this is to refer the one from the previous meeting. And that carries the Council Rector opposed. Okay. There's always a couple ways to do things. Correspondence. G1, there's one piece of correspondence, and it has a clerk's note for considering granting permission. So if I could have someone move the receipt and a motion to grant consideration, or consider granting, or no, actually to grant, not consider grant, to grant permission for the Royal Canadian Legion 265 to hold their annual Poppy Committee. Councillor Long moves it, second by Councillor Kuntz. Discussion on G1. Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly, I know it was them making the request, but it did not cover the entirety of the Township of Langley. Do we know whether or not it's because they don't have enough volunteers to be able to do that, or can we ourselves just amend the scope of their selling of poppies throughout the township?
Ms. Bauer, does it specify?
It doesn't specify, but specifically, a motion of council is not required, so it would by default mean the whole community was included. We couldn't exclude them. It's more of a public information
Courtesy.
last courtesy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll call the question on G1. Carries unanimously. And we have minutes of committees. Just for receipt, we'll go with H1, Heritage Advisory, Recreation, Culture, and Parks Advisory. If I could have H1 moved. Councillor Davis, seconder. Councillor Kuntz, discussion. Call the question on H1. Oops, sorry, the speaker is waiting. Well, on the next one or on this one? We're just doing receipt on H1.
Okay, but last time I got caught on this too, so I want to discuss one of the minutes.
Go ahead.
Right now? He wants to discuss H2.
Yeah, we're not. But if it's H2, there's recommended motion regarding the funding. If that's what you want to discuss, then that'll come on H2.
It's kind of linked because it's.
Okay, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, well, so I got the button down. Yeah, well, it is linked because H2 is a concern, but the minutes of H1 preclude, lead up to H2. So
the concern would be with the minutes in H1. If there's any errors.
Okay, let me leave it for the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
okay, I'm going to call the question on
I guess you have to receive the minutes. Yeah.
H1. That carries unanimously. Now we're on to H2. Councillor Long, if you want to push your button.
Thanks. Well, I've distributed a copy of a motion that was made on April the 15th. So I was just a little concerned and would like to ask the councillor responsible, perhaps, or anybody, how come the CRP, right?
RCP.
RCP, I keep getting them mixed up. That's Recreation, Culture, and Parks. We're busy discussing this issue of two-tiered fee structure when there was a motion saying that we don't want to refer that to them. So I guess I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, but it is a concern, and I think that we need to keep an eye on these kinds of things. And so here we are now, potentially entertaining a motion that was contrary to a motion that was made on April the 15th. Okay. So rather than get it all yucky and mucky, I think I would like to see this presentation that's convinced our RCP to go this direction, and perhaps that presentation could be made to council. That's one suggestion, or I'll leave it to the rest of council to have their comments, but I certainly can't see accepting their recommendation when we have a direction quite the opposite in April.
Okay, so what I'm going to take from what you've just said is you'd just like to have the co-chair explain this prior to us entertaining a motion. So Councillor Woodward is the co-chair on the committee. So Councillor Woodward, just give us some background on this.
So I appreciate Councillor Long reminding us regarding this this item here from April 15th that was defeated by council. I see I also voted against it, so that's very helpful, Councillor Long. Thank you. But I think there was a presentation on it by staff to the committee, and this motion came out of that presentation irrespective of this council motion. So I think that, if it were moved, the mayor maybe would consider ruling it out of order for this reason. But for me, it is a different approach. They were looking specifically for public consultation around the ideas, not necessarily an endorsement of the ideas themselves. That's why the committee came to the conclusion to conduct a public consultation process around differential pricing based on residency, based upon, I think, a desire to solve the problem. And that's why you don't see a lot of solutions being presented here. What you have is an identification of whether this is a significant enough problem that wants to be solved, such that if we have residents of Aldergrove who feel that because of the success of the water park that they're not able to access it when they want to because of the demand from others within the region, that's something that the committee wanted to have staff and council and potentially the public explore, and how to solve the access issues around that, separate from cost and pricing. And I think what the committee really focused on, from what I remember around the discussion, was that it was reported in that presentation that of all the visitors to the water park this season, 70% were from outside of Langley, from other parts of the region, and with the increased attendance this year, which is great, there was some pressure put on access for local residents that we heard from on social media and other feedback that came back earlier this season. So that was where I think the committee was going with this, and went in the direction of recommending to council to consider public consultation and let council take it from there. And I'll wait for others to weigh in before necessarily moving or not moving this motion.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. So just a couple of things. I think, it'd be interesting before we send it, sending it off for public consultation means that we're going in that direction. And I think there's maybe some steps in between that we could do. It has come to council. Council has said no. But maybe just asking staff to come back with some ideas on how to deal with this. A couple of reasons I would say that is, number one, the federal government contributed $10 million to the project, which in my view allows for a broader use. It's money that Township of Langley residents didn't have to raise, and it comes from the broader community. So there's that piece of it that I don't think we should lose sight of when others come and use it. The other thing I'd like to know is how many days of the year was it really crowded where our residents couldn't get in, and we're dealing with a few hot days in summer. I don't know how many it is. It could be 2, it could be 20. But that's what we were looking at, and maybe dealing with that issue by doing I've always been concerned about doing a differential pricing for our facilities. Maybe it's just this facility, but in the off season we do require some of that revenue from people outside the Township of Langley to help that facility, and that does happen. And our residents also use facilities outside of the Township of Langley. So one way of doing this is maybe just send this to staff to come back with some ideas. It's not really, in contrary to what we've said before, but it's looking at other options, and options could be looking at special days for the Township of Langley, or giving special youth passes, or that sort of thing. So that's one thought.
Clarifications
okay.
Only, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Yeah.
My mic back on. I'd appreciate that.
Just for that. So that's why I say
clarification.
Going straight to consultation might be.
Yep. No, and this is the committee's work.
Yep,
I want to
fine.
stress for Councillor Long that all councillors are responsible for all things. That in this case, this did come from the committee, and again, we're not voting members of these committees. But I did want to stress, if you look carefully at the motion, the concept of differential pricing. So where this was going was that even if guaranteed access for residents was a challenge, some mechanism to raise the cost for residents outside the region, so that we're not necessarily subsidizing the operational cost of that water park for residents that maybe are further afield than Surrey and Abbotsford. And then potentially there was some discussion about getting some numbers at the next committee meeting to look at if we could increase some of that pricing for people outside the region, that might help offset some of the cost of youth passes and other discounts that were also being considered. So I'll just add that to the conversation.
That's right.
Thank you.
So there's no motion on the floor, but there's a speaker's list. So let's just go through everyone just to have a quick comment, and then perhaps Councillor Woodward, if he wishes to move a motion, we'll put it back to him. So Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just put down a couple of comments because for myself, I think it's always good to, even though in April we had a particular decision that we took, it's always viable and reasonable to continue to look into matters. And so one of the things I recognize is that the information, I'm not on that committee, but the information was not tangible and available at an earlier time. So now we have the benefit of the information that's come from staff and also empirical data about the usage, etc. My comment was having to do, I think, similar to Mayor Froze's perspective, I think, is that a staff review might be best. But my thought was looking to best practices if we wanted to consider differential recreation facility pricing in other communities. I know we talked about it at length, and there was some concern that it might be setting a precedent that would be challenging for us in the future. However, I do understand that there are implications for having such a wonderful facility that's very well used and loved, and it can cause issues in terms of, I'll just call it overcrowding. But I personally would like to see in any analysis from the staff, if we were to increase the cost of the outdoor water park relative to the possibility that these increases for non-residents could potentially lower attendance and reduce revenues, if that could be the unintended consequence of doing that. I assume it depends on the price point that we determine would be most reasonable, but it does appear to me that there could be situations in which those user groups, if you're charging too much money, will make another consumer choice. And so, and the only other thing that I thought just off the top of my head is there might be issues about timing where you could prefer at a discount local residents as opposed to people coming from outside the community.
Your Worship, just as a point of clarification, when we hear tiered pricing, staff are actually hearing discounts for township residents. There's some major implications to charging differential pricing, but there may be ways to structure it such that we recognize township residents at a different, at a discount, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've had the benefit now of pretty much two full seasons of this facility. I think that the staff are certainly have had a lot of experience with this facility. I think they probably connect quite a bit to other facilities to see what best practices are. And, it makes sense to me that we would maybe hear from staff. I think they understand the challenge here, in the whereases here, it doesn't really talk about access to the facility. That doesn't seem to be the issue, unless that's just missing. But it seems to be more around a sense of fairness that somehow non-township residents are paying the same rate and should be different. So I would support that interim step rather than going to public consultation. I can imagine that most people in the township would like to have lower prices. So I would think that what I'd like to do is hear from staff first and to see what sort of thoughts they would have around it. I think they know the issue, and I think that would be, let's hear from the experts as opposed to ourselves.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Well, I just wanted to say that I agree with your point, Mayor, about the fact that it was federal money and, it's for everyone. I think there's some simple solution. I think Councillor Long had one. I mean, I'm a facility user. I get passes. I've always got the 10 or 20 pass, and you get a discount, and it gives me an opportunity for those that live in the community to be provided that discount, and that discount not provided to non-residents. So the non-resident would just simply pay, where a resident who bought one of the packages, and it could be as low as 3, they would get a discount because they're buying a package thing. It's just a suggestion, I know, but I certainly I don't know if this motion or this recommendation from Park and Rec is going in the direction I would certainly like it to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go next to Councillor Woodward. I just want to say it's great that our committees are doing this work on taking a little bit of a deeper dive and coming back with some recommendations. However, it is up to us to take that recommendation and then work it through to something that perhaps will work well for everyone in the township. But I do appreciate the work that they've done. So, Councillor Woodward, you've heard the comments. Let you craft a motion that you think you can take back to the committee.
I don't necessarily want to be the councillor responsible. I'm still hung up on that.
You are responsible.
I'm still hung up on that.
We're giving you total responsibility.
But I just want to add too that just to clarify, so the motion itself maybe wasn't the most complete, because if you look at the whereases, there's only contemplation of of differential pricing for the water park portion. I just want to make that clear for everyone. This isn't heading down the path of the Langley City problem, so to speak. This is simply the idea that it's a pretty good deal for a family to attend the water park for a 3-hour period. I think the committee reached that conclusion with the members of the committee, and there would be some desire to, of course, potentially look at raising that to be more competitive with some of the alternatives for that period of time for a family, but not necessarily want to impose that on Aldergrove or township residents, but to look at, given the attendance is so high from outside of the township, to look at some other ways of potentially achieving a substantial increase that's more in line with the cost of operating it as well. So for me, I'm happy to refer this to staff to let the rest of the council maybe get that presentation and get some additional information that the committee has, and we can go from there if that's acceptable.
Sure. Second by, sorry, who seconded it? Second by Councilor Whitmire, or Councilor Long seconds it. Okay, any further discussion on that? I see none, I'll call the question. And that was H2. Carries unanimously. All right, Councillor Arneson. Now, before you begin on I-1, just to remind Council that in our Council Priority Committee, we did defer B3, which to this item, and B3 is that the removed $125,000 be used towards a financial sustainability study for the Township of Langley. So I think the reason it's got moved here is if there was some further work to be done, there is some funds available that were earmarked a while ago to do some sort of a study. And I just know in my discussion with Mr. Backen earlier that 1994 and 2004 similar studies were done on financial practices. So just with that little background, I'm then going to turn it over to Councillor Arneson. This is her work. Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Oh, sorry. I misunderstood your comments. I thought Mr. Backen was going to give us maybe some context I thought would be helpful about the
I just want to say that,
part.
Yeah, and there was a bit of a history, but I think I'll let you go through it, and then if Mr. Backen then I think can give us some background, and maybe and I'm not going to presuppose what happens to this, but it could also go to staff with that information and come back to us with a history and next steps on what to do.
Okay.
But I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Worship. So I'm just going to read the therefore be it resolved portion. Therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to review best management practices regarding long-term financial planning and report back to Council with a view to informing the development of a long-term financial strategy based on the projection of the Township's known and anticipated capital funding requirements for 10 years. This analysis should include a framework that considers, amongst other things, how to fund capital projects using diverse funding streams, the prioritization of projects based on regulatory and other mandatory considerations, creating and sustaining appropriate contingency and funding reserves, and considers all other strategies and options to operationalize a model that identifies how to fund the majority of current and future capital expenditures within the Township for the next decade.
Moved by Councillor Arneson, second by Councillor Richter. And Mr. Backen, perhaps I could just ask you to elaborate a little bit on the history of this. It's been done before in the Township, and perhaps it is time to do it again, but I'll just give you an opportunity to speak to it.
Preliminary comments, Your Worship. Just a reminder that we have the matter that was referred from the afternoon as well.
Yes, I mentioned that. So that's the funding that, if it was to go to a project to look at this, that funding would be in place.
So thank you. My point would be disposition, whatever this may be, may have to include both parts, but we can see how this plays out, certainly.
Okay.
Your question then is in terms of what's been done historically and where could this take us. What's been done historically has been, as you said, roughly 1994 and roughly 2004, 2005. In 1994, the process was to actually engage an expert panel to actually review the township finances in terms of where they were at and what it looked like. And there was actually a fairly lengthy report and process undertaken that I think included about a 2 or 3 volume report that was utilized that suggested some parameters. It was interesting, as by recollection, that report actually suggested the use of borrowing in prudent circumstances, but took much more of a private sector approach than I think the township had historically seen. We have snippets of those those reports. We have the staff reports, but the actual materials we're still looking for. Some of that material did fast forward us to 2004, 2005, where there was a second, I guess, a long-term financial plan undertaken, and that's the plan we're operating under now, subject to any revisions the councils may have made over the years. That report was actually much more of a policy report. It was less of a expert panel and much more of a review of our current practices in 2004, 2005, with a view to trying to determine what the best path forward would be. That led to a number of policies. It was, again, fairly lengthy, and many of those policies are still in place, subject to council's direction to modify them. So, for example, we are now doing selective borrowing as opposed to the no debt policy that was in place from that era. That leads us to the future then. These are very good initiatives that can be undertaken. They are, however, very time consuming and fairly lengthy depending upon the parameters that are put in place. They can take, I guess they'd be analogous to a bit of a neighborhood planning process or OCP in terms of resources and timing. And that can mean that during the intervening period, there is a lot of work to be done, but also a lot of things that council has to consider in restricting some of their processes while that's underway. That being said, it's always prudent to do an update or refreshment of our present policies to see where we're at, to make sure they're consistent and to make sure they're given the proper direction to staff based on the current council's direction. So I hope that background helps somewhat as we go forward, because we have the two pieces here where we can now begin to proceed, and we may wish to refer both pieces to staff for some recommendations in terms of how we could meld the two processes and come up with a process that would meet the concerns.
Thank you for that. I think we do need a little bit more information. I'm not sure if we would be utilizing staff time to do this. I'm sure there's always staff time, but how much they'd be doing if we'd be bringing in outside consultants to assist with this, and that's where the funding would go. So an option would be to just take and refer this plus the funding from B3 to staff to come back with some recommendations. Is that what you're suggesting?
That would be an approach. You mentioned something about the use of experts or consultants, and that's something we could entertain, but that would be something we'd have to work out when we worked with council to define the terms of reference for this. Much of the work can be done as a refresher of our existing policies, if you will, a policy update and review. With that, it may be prudent to go forth to experts or the public, or maybe that's sufficient. The other option is to simply have a third party, such as our auditors, come forth and do a review of our policies and processes as to budgeting. But I'm not sure that's the most efficient. I think this is more of a policy framework that we're looking at and trying to make sure that we have a good sense of direction and that the existing policy structure represents the will of this council.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Well, the dovetailing of these things, I think, has been very fortuitous. And so, independent of each other, we seem to have money that's potentially available, as well as an opportunity, I think, that council can consider, at the very least, a refreshing of what our current policies are. And so I do agree with Mr. Backen that it's most appropriate that we have a common understanding of where we're at. So what the original last policy update entailed, I think you said 2004 and 5, and then sort of a snapshot or a context of what that looks like on the ground, how we're utilizing different components of that. Most of all, I think I just wanted to impress that my expectation is that going forward, we need to have a continuous long-term financial plan. So structurally, I found some interesting references that refer to a financial sustainability framework, and it takes a longer-term view. I specifically chose 10 years only because I think it's sometimes harder to have a true reference to what could potentially happen in a longer-term time frame. I mean, it's realistic to think that after 5 years, you're going to plan again for the other 5 after the 10, but 20 years, 30 years, I know that, that's a longer-term outlook, and I think we just need to be more proactive in looking at forecasting. I have a lot of notes here, but I'm not going to get into all of that. I think it's most important that we just get some feedback from staff as to where we're at, and in the knowledge that we do have funding for this, we can take a secondary opinion about whether or not how or what we would like to do with that information moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
I just want a couple of clarifications, Mr. Mayor, where you might be going with this. Like, is the goal that right now staff are going to run off and do a report to council regarding a long-term financial strategy based upon projections and so on. I'm just trying to, so I separated the therefore, then the this analysis, that first sentence, a view to review best management practices. So are they going to run off and review management practices, and then regarding financial planning, report back with what exactly, with a view to informing, so we're not developing it, whether we're going to, a long-term financial strategy based on the projection of the township's known and anticipated capital funding requirements for 10 years. Well, do we even have that? If we have rolling 5-year plans, Mr. Bracken, don't we update our 5-year plan every year? Are we now creating a 10-year plan that will be obsolete within a couple of years?
I think we're looking at policy.
I'm trying to understand what the motion, what's going to happen if I vote for this.
Yeah. So, Mr. Bracken, I think, and we may be getting referral motion, so we're going back to staff to come back with some criteria around this and a little bit of a deeper dive, but we'd be looking at policy, not at actual financial plans. Mr. Bracken.
That's correct, Your Worship. My interpretation of the discussion so far is that this is effectively a referral of this item, the item B3 from the afternoon session, and as well any budget envelopes that we have to staff to come back to council with the feedback and review of our historical processes and where we're at now, so we can plot a course to go forward. So we'd have some recommendations. It would be that decision point for council as to what that would look like, whether it's a technical analysis, a 10-year plan, what it may be. But it's usually helpful to find out where we've been, what we have, and from there determine where we're going.
Okay, so I mean, again, I'm just trying to understand what's going to happen if I vote for this. If it's referred, that's fine. But I'm trying to think where I was 10 years ago, and I'm telling you, I didn't think I'd be sitting here. So now
I think I'd be sitting here.
maybe Jack's in the same boat. So we're going to try to come up with a 10-year plan. I'm just trying to understand what value that would even really have if, for example, the opportunity that came up and now we're into a bylaw approval process for significant borrowing, which maybe wasn't even anticipated 2 years ago. What value does spending all this time creating a 10-year plan actually have versus what we're doing, which is a new 5-year plan every year?
No, that's a very good point. Where we see this is not coming back with the 10-year plan, but to present to you, I think, just the history and the direction in terms of how we've been processing it, so council can assess if they would like to move towards a 10-year plan. It is difficult to imagine at this point a comprehensive binding 10-year plan because, as you've said, there's a lot of variabilities, and that's why we're working with 5-year rolling plans, which are what the proper legislation requires. So it's that framework. And then in answer to your other question, we can check with the 2 parole officers and see how much longer your sentences are, but that may take some time.
No, I know there's a lot of people hoping for a by-election any minute, but so this analysis should include a framework that I didn't really, because I'm not a financial person, I'm not an accountant, I didn't really know what a lot of that stuff meant. So I got hung up on the should include as opposed to maybe includes, because again, I don't know what I'm endorsing by voting for this, so I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, I'll put that referral motion to refer this plus B3 to staff for recommendations.
Is there a seconder to the referral? Councillor Arneson seconds referral.
Okay, and
so on
yeah, and
discussion on referral.
I think it's good if we ask staff to come back to us with a firm recommendation on how they see this proceeding. Maybe it shouldn't be 10 years, maybe 7's good enough. My concern has been, and still is, the excessive amount of new debt we seem to be relying on. And that's not good, I don't think, in the long term. And I don't think it's sustainable in the long term. So I'm quite happy to see money going towards figuring out how we can be sustainable in our particularly in our capital funding.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on the referral? There were a couple of buttons pushed. The referral's on. So, yeah, Councillor Ferguson, I know there are a couple of buttons that, just if you want to speak to this, I'm leaving it a little bit open, or on the motion or on the referral, just so you have your comments.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, I agree with Councillor Woodward. It's, perhaps that's the problem with notices of motion. It's we're all well intended, but there's not an awful lot that we can fall back on as far as what does it actually say. If you break it down, are we asking staff to prepare a in-depth financial plan complete with analysis from professionals, as we did in 1994 when I was a member of the long-range financial plan that involved folks like Michael Walker from the Fraser Institute, university professors, accountants, and otherwise. We sat down and we went through the line by line the finances of the government, and came up with a plan that was more of a free enterprise, private sector plan. Many things that we implemented, many we didn't. Of course, the province is always asking for new things, as our 5-year plans and audits and I guess capital. There's all sorts of things being added on an ongoing basis. So I'm just caught up in you know, where we go with this and how much it costs and who we want to involve. It's just it kind of almost saddens me to think that perhaps our staff are not providing us with the information or giving us the right answers. So I won't be supporting either a referral or this motion either. I just think it's Mr. Mayor, I just hoping a little bit of direction from you as our staff are giving us information, are answering questions on budget, are answering things that are important. And if they're not, I'd be saddened to think that they are not.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, I am not sure exactly where this is going either. I think it feels like to me, in my time on council, that we have had considerable conversations around with budgeting, as well as other conversations around infrastructure and projects, where we have talked about capital projects and diverse funding streams. And we have talked about prioritization and how those things fit with our community and their access to certain grants and kinds of things that we can take advantage of at certain times in priority. We have talked about setting aside and having appropriate contingency and reserves and funding aspects. So, you know, I'm not really sure what we're doing other than asking for more clarity of what we already do. I feel this, I don't think that at this time that for what we're doing is necessary at this time. And so because of the confusion of it, because I think we're already doing a lot of these things, I think we have excellent staff in this area of finances who are managing these things. I think they already follow best practices. I don't think we're functioning out in the wilderness. I think that, you know, I won't support this going for referral or support this motion as written.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I haven't said it publicly before, but I have talked independently to staff. I'm not going to, you know, disclose what was discussed there, but I think that we cannot do enough in order to understand our current situation. I currently would not necessarily want to rely just on the frameworks that we have. I think we're entering into uncharted waters. Things have changed dramatically in the last year in terms of the way that we are looking at funding our projects. And I think that it's a good time to take a deep breath and say to ourselves, not that we're doing anything wrong currently, but how can we do it better? How can we focus our energy and intention on making sure that we are sustainable in the longer term? I think it's prudent to do that. This is not dismissive of anything that we currently do or of our staff, because I know at any given time I can go and ask questions, but I think this has to do with philosophical ideas and advances that we may or may not understand necessarily the consequences. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not the case that the township has never borrowed money, but I think the magnitude of the borrowing is something that one might want to consider in terms of looking at a longer-term plan and how that can be balanced with other opportunities that may come forward. So that's the only reason that I brought it forward. I'm not a disgruntled councillor that thinks that I can't get any information. I just want to have a good strategy going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, well, I won't vote against this now because I wouldn't want to be seen as opposed to a good strategy. But I wanted to clarify, Mr. Mayor, what's happening with the other funded item? And are we referring this and then you're going to vote separately on that, or are we going to combine it together?
It's been
It's
referred
combined
together. It's been combined to refer
Okay,
both.
just want to clarify that, to refer it to staff to, just get that read back for me.
Just to come back with the history and next steps, and then, sorry. Yeah. That's right.
Recommendation. So
and
some
I'm
options.
interpreting that to staff will come back with a bit of a history, a bit of a next steps, which are the recommendations. So sorry, I didn't use the word recommendations, but next steps.
Okay, that's good to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, see no further discussion. I'm going to call the question on I-1. And it carries Councillor Whitmarsh and Councillor Ferguson opposed. All right, that wraps that up. I-3, I had asked staff to throw this on in the 11th hour, and I received one email, and the email referred to City of Richmond's motion. I happened to be sitting next to the mayor of the City of Richmond, so I asked him what they did, and regarding vape ads on their property and property that's controlled by them. And he says you can't prohibit it because of overarching legislation, but you certainly, they said what they're doing is they're looking to working with some of the advertising companies to see if they can restrict the ads in their community. Now, this is something that really is has come to the forefront in the last little while on vaping, and I know other levels of government are looking at legislation to bring in rules similar to alcohol and tobacco advertising, but they aren't in there yet. So all this was is just open a bit of a discussion and see if we would, if council would be up to or would support just sending this to staff to maybe find out from the City of Richmond what they've done, see what we can do to, if it's possible for us to restrict vaping ads on Township Langley property and I know bus stops, there's some sort of relationship between the municipality and Translink on those, so if we have any authority on those. So that's why this is here. Councillor Long has moved it. Councillor Davis seconds it. Discussion, Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, Ms. Bauer, the way this was presented in the public agenda, it actually looked like it was my motion because it didn't have Mayor Furrows above it. So if I had somebody ask me why I don't like to vape. So if you could just maybe next time just clarify that. You've got that already. Thank you. I actually support the theory of looking at restricting these, but just wanted everybody to know that it wasn't my motion. Thanks.
Good point, and that's normally the way you do it. But it just happened to be that was at the 11th hour. The agenda was heading out the door, and I quickly made a call, and you accommodated me. So that's probably why that was slipped up. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I had a similar concern or thought about what jurisdiction that we have over this, if it's a legal product. And I understand from talking to many people that it's becoming an increasing problem, especially for young people. And so I would like to take action. I think it's very helpful to have a discussion about it and find out what it is that we are able to do with the jurisdiction that we have. So I will be supporting this.
Okay, Ms. Barr, can you read back the motion? I know you probably wordsmithed it a little better than what I presented.
The discussion of vaping, that the motion be referred to staff to investigate if there was restrictions the township could place on vaping ads in township property and
property within the community in property the township has some control over, such as the transit bus stop ads. Okay, Councillor Richter.
But isn't the intent also to not recreate the wheel if Richmond's got a good model to use Richmond's model?
And its direction would be to check with City of Richmond because they've already gone through this. Okay, I'm going to call the question on I3. Carries unanimously. And Councillor Richter.
Other business, right?
Other business.
Okay. First of all, I had a query this weekend relative to the motion on Murrayville water, that apparently Hoppington water is now experiencing the same thing. So I wanted to ask staff if that is widespread through the Hoppington as well as Murrayville. This browning, the manganese settling out?
Mr. Steffi?
Your Worship, the Hoppington area is a bit unique in that there are separate private systems and there are municipal control systems.
No, this is municipal controlled systems.
Right. We have not heard about the issue in the Hoppington area. And we are aware of the issue in not just Murrayville, but also Aldergrove. In fact, it's the reason why we do have a treatment facility in Aldergrove is because of the exact reason why we're seeing the issue in Murrayville, and that is the presence of elements such as manganese interacting with chlorine.
And I'm wondering if it's the type of chlorine product that we're using.
It is not the type of chlorine product. It is actually the interaction, the chemical reaction that occurs between the elements, manganese in particular, iron in some cases, and chlorination process that is required for public health reasons.
Okay. Well, it was just brought to my attention. I wasn't aware Hoppington was having an issue with it. Also, in the items distributed on October 17th. Item number 7 on page 16, which it was the update on Willoughby pedestrian improvements. I'm wondering if we could send a copy of that to the Willoughby Residents Association.
Mr. Bracken, yep, you'll do that.
Yep, and item 10 on page 25, the request for a hand sanitizer in the Yorks and outdoor bathroom, I guess. Is that?
Item 10, that's been forwarded to Engineering Division, so is there any update on that, Mr. Sefi, at this point?
Yes, Your Worship. Staff has attempted to install sanitizers on a case-by-case basis at Yorkshire Park on one particular location, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Item number 11 on page 26, which concerns speed signs in all Yorkshire Park sections, that it all be reduced to 30 kilometers, and I'm wondering if we could get an update on that.
Okay, Mrs. Sefi, thank you.
And number 12 on page, whatever number 12 is on, page 27, which is about the intersection of 240th and 56th. And I'm wondering something about, there's a hazard there, and I'm wondering if Council could get an update on that one as well.
Okay.
And then item number 13 on page 28, the request to build a new indoor pool by Home Depot. So I'm wondering if we will be responding to this lady to tell her that that's private property, and whether we should maybe refer it to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee.
That's a good idea. Councilor.
Hey, Mr. Backen, you can take that direction. Thank you. Is there any other business?
Yeah, no, that's it for me.
Councilor Long?
Well, I had all the same ones except the last item. Didn't have that one on my list. But there was also an issue that came through. It wasn't in this distribution package, but it was about needle boxes in parks. I mean, so I didn't hear anything back from staff on whether that's something that should be looked at in certain parks if there's an issue with needles.
Oh, and that was on a previous distribution list?
Yeah, it was. I'm sorry, I don't have that particular number handy.
Staff will look into it.
And then the last thing, Your Worship, is this discussion about 52nd or 56 and 240th. There was also some mention of 64th and 232nd, and there are no lights or flashings or anything there. Now, there used to be those little orange battery-operated lights at when road construction was done, but I guess we don't use those anymore. But it is pitch black. And I know that the staff have said they're waiting for utilities and so forth, but I hope that, well, I share the concern of that letter from that gentleman on the item that Councillor Victor brought up, I guess at number 12, that some of these things that are under construction that are getting held up now that it's getting so dark, so early, and the rain and so forth, I hope that they can be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other business? Seeing none, motion to terminate.
Termination.
Councillor Davis moves termination. Seconder. Councillor Whitmarsh. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. The meeting's now terminated.